So it was so hard to prepare for this because Nellie basically does not exist on the internet. So any of you that Google her to try to find any information will find very little information.
I like to stay a little secret.
Why?
Because I want to be like an anthropologist. And the more you know about me, the more like you would suspect biases or, I don't know, be nervous.
We're going to get to all of that today, though. Like, she has nowhere to hide today. Today, we're going to ask her all of the questions. So I would love to just start, how did you get here? Like, tell me your career path. You've gone from these incredibly scrappy outlets to the Gray Lady. What was that like? What was that transition like? Tell me your path.
My path. I grew up in San Francisco, and then and when I grew up, there wasn't really a tech world in San Francisco per se. It was all in Silicon Valley. It was down in Cupertino, so that wasn't like really part of my conversation. And then when I came back from college in 2010, the city had become overrun by the startup world. It was like a whole new city, and I just became obsessed with it. And so I started as an intern at the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, which is an amazing paper, and they had me covering nightlife. So I was a party reporter covering galas and symphonies, and I ended up covering a lot of startup parties and just getting into the scene. And then found it weird as shit. Are we on the I mean, is this like videoed? Can I swear?
No, go for it.
I don't know. Yeah. I just found it like weird as shit and interesting and disturbing, but also fun. And I liked it and I hated it, and I don't know. So then I was at the Chronicle, and then I went to a tech blog, Recode, and then I kind of job hopped. I went to like The Guardian. I was at Vice News Tonight for a year and wrote for magazines, and now I'm at The Times. But I've been doing the same beat the whole time, which is tech and culture and what's happening there.
So the city is this totally different place. You come back, you're a seventh generation San Franciscan?
Sixth generation.
Sixth generation San Franciscan. What did you see that was so captivating to say, this is what I want to dedicate my time to?
I saw the beginning of something that was going to be just enormously powerful. I saw really smart people flooding in. I saw hubris and this idea that anyone with no experience could change everything. And I was just captivated by it. I don't know. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I'd gone to school in New York, and so I'd been in that world. And like the startup world is just sort of intoxicating in its weirdness and in its absurdity. And it was funny too. Like I couldn't stop laughing at what I was seeing. I just like, and every time I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. I want to like be a foreign correspondent. Like I want to go and like live in Nairobi, and then, but like I just like couldn't stop like thinking of like, okay, but 5 more stories. Like I've got like these. Like, I wanted to like go.
Getting your fix.
Yeah, I'm like hooked to it. I still am. I'm still like entertained by it every day.
They say that it's addictive technology.
Well, that's an interesting other thing to cover. But yeah, I find it really compelling.
And so you're there, you're reporting, and what I love about your writing is that you're an incredible storyteller. And I think that the story about Esalen was the one where I was like, oh my God, who is this person that's reporting on this? And why does she get it so well? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Esalen story. Esalen was especially dear to my heart because my mother was part of the early days of Esalen. So it was like seeing this shift.
Cool.
So talk about that story. It's
you were probably horrified by that story.
Oh my God, like the child care goes, no, yeah. So talk about that because it encapsulates so much. I think a lot of what you're seeing around technology being this like cultural, it's a culture, it's a religion, like what is this anthropological thing?
It is a culture. It is a religion.
Yeah.
Esalen is a storied old hippie enclave getaway center in Big Sur, and they've recently gone through a rebrand where they had it's now being run by this startup kid, and it's kind of rebranding for the startup world. And so I just went down there and hung out with them.
the paragraphs are priceless. It's some of the most priceless reporting. They wonder if they're doing the right thing for humanity. These are questions that can only be answered behind closed doors.
Well,
right?
yeah, like what it captures to me is it captures, I really like to be in a physical space, and it captures in a physical space a lot of the anxiety that Silicon Valley has been having. There's been sort of a crisis of the soul in the last year where people who are building these products genuinely are very nervous about what they're building. And so Esalen and its revival and all of that captures that. And Esalen's not the only place. There's other places in the area that are opening to address this, but captures that sort of like inner turmoil that a lot of people are feeling that I think hadn't really been quite reported about, but yeah.
So what do you think they're looking for? There's this sense of soul-seeking in the community that your reporting has been getting at beautifully. So we see the whole facade of venture capital, the hockey stick, all of this bluster and bravado, but you're really seeing something under the hood because you're reporting from inside of it.
People are starting very slowly, and probably a decade late, but starting to realize that the products they're building have an impact. And that is very disturbing to people, and that is very upsetting, and there's a lot of anger that social issues have to be talked about when we're doing tech. Like, when I first started reporting, there was sort of a sense that I wasn't like a real tech reporter, or like that this wasn't really, or I was anti-tech. And I think it's been hard for people in the tech world, people who work at the big companies at Facebook and people who work at the small companies, to start realizing that their work is having like cultural impact, and then is maybe even having a negative cultural impact. Like maybe it's bad. I think, understanding what it's doing has been very disturbing to them. And it's also, the press has been part of the problem with this, right? Like reporters have covered Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's been covered like it's a business story, like it's about stock prices and how much was raised, and oh, look at this cool founder. And it hasn't been covered as a culture story. It hasn't been covered as a power story. And so, yeah, I hope more people start doing that.
And so you're doing that, and you're in the middle of it. What do you feel like internally? Like, what is the soul journey that you're going on in covering this thing that's been covered totally incorrectly?
My soul journey?
Yes, what is that like internally as a reporter? Do you go in and like, is it incredibly difficult to keep a straight face in some of these conversations?
I never do.
It's just the We Live, I have to say the We Live Vice video, I highly suggest you check that out, because Nellie is just like trying to keep it together in this sort of dystopian housing situation. And
the hardest thing about TV was they said I had to stop giggling, and they were like, giggling doesn't work on camera, stop giggling. And I was like, but this guy lives like in a dorm.
It's a $5,000 a month
It's
dorm.
a $5,000 a month dorm.
Yeah.
My soul journey. I don't know.
How do you find any ray of light or sanity in what appears to be just this sort of this odd human implosion?
I don't see it as a human implosion.
You don't?
I don't see it as bad.
Oh, okay.
I see it as just as like the most interesting, important thing that's happening right now. And so like, I don't know, like I just want to document it. I don't find it, I find some of it disturbing, some of it is upsetting, and some of it will be hard. I guess like the hardest situations I've found is sometimes when you're reporting on people who people don't like, they really want you to be judgmental. So like, and a lot of people obviously have problems with people in Silicon Valley, or like I did a story about James Damore and about the men's rights movement in Silicon Valley. I am obviously not a men's rights activist. Like, I'm like a San Francisco lesbian. But I wrote about them in a straight way, and didn't end every quote with like, he said, comma, like a jerk would, or something, you know. And people got really mad at me. Like people got really, really mad that I reported on these people and that I like quote, gave them a platform was the thing. And so that's been hard, like actually hard.
Because they were expecting you to have a point of view?
Yeah, I don't want to have a point of view. I really don't.
Do you?
No, like I'm genuinely just like truly amused and like by the whole spectrum of the shit show of life. Like,
yeah. There's a lot.
But like, do I have a point of view? Okay, like, am I a men's rights activist? No, I'm a feminist. Like, I would self-identify as that. Like, without it, yes. So I have the point of view there. But yeah, so that's been hard. That's tricky.
Yeah.
Sometimes covering it and trying to do it in a way that's straight and that's flat and that's accurate and that's not driven by an agenda.
And I imagine you're oftentimes the only woman in the room with a lot of these conversations, right? So talk about what that's been like as a reporter and just as a woman, as a lesbian woman in San Francisco. To be in the heart of it.
To be the only woman in the room. I have gotten so used to it, I barely even see it. I brought my little sister once to the Battery, which is like this private club in San Francisco that a lot of like venture capitalists and startup people go to. And I brought her in for a drink, and we were going to sit, and she wants to get into tech. And she was like, Nellie, is this a men's club? and genuinely, truly thought it was. And I looked around, and I was like, oh, my God, we are the only two women having drinks here. Like, okay, it might be. Like, you get, yeah, it's upsetting. It's disturbing.
Yeah.
I find it disturbing.
And are you someone who's taking on wanting to change the culture in that way? Do you think of your role, is that a role that you think of yourself playing?
I would not mind if my reporting made it a more diverse place, both in terms of gender and in terms of race.
Yeah.
I find the sort of whiteness of it to be pretty disturbing also, and I don't think there's a lot of talk about women in tech, and there should be, but I think also like race in tech is appalling, the situation right now. So yeah, I would love if that changed. I don't see myself as an activist though.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I think that documenting things and showing them as they are can like disturb people enough and anger people enough that then change happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the stories that you feel that you failed on?
A story I failed on. I got a correction on the obit I wrote yesterday.
Oh, the dressmaker?
Yes, I called a half-sister a stepsister. God, so I failed there. But like, okay, like a real failure. I'm like OCD and I obsess on that kind of stuff. The times when I've failed are, it's really important to always remember the power of being a reporter, and sometimes I have not warned people enough what being thrust into a story means. And I feel that that's a failure when I don't let someone know what that means. And so now, as I've gotten older, this has just been something I've learned over the years. If you're interviewing a CEO, they know exactly what they're doing. But a lot of the time I'm not. A lot of the time I'm just wandering around a room and sort of finding who's going to talk to me and chatting and getting quotes. And so now I always call everyone back and talk to them. Always is, not every time, but like if they're saying something that I know is going to be hot.
Yeah.
I call them and talk them through it. And just warn them, not that I'm going to change the quote, but just to give them a heads up.
Yep.
And I think that that's something I've learned and something that I fucked up a lot before.
Yep.
Just on an emotional level. Like journalistically, I don't know what the rules are about that, but on an emotional level, that felt important.
Yep. I'd love to talk about this week. So this was a really interesting week for you with the YouTube shooting. And what I loved was that you kept digging at that story and you uncovered some really interesting motivations from the shooter at YouTube around advertising and this sort of change of revenue. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that story and what that process was like on the ground as that story was unfolding, because it was very dramatic, and it's also sort of represents the collision of a lot of these issues that we're talking about now.
Yeah. So the woman who went to YouTube and shot 3 employees and herself, was it 4 employees now? I think it was 3 employees. 3 were at the hospital, at the general hospital. 4 employees and herself?
And herself, yeah, I think that's right, yep.
She was obsessed with YouTube's policies, and in particular YouTube's policy around demonetization, which is something that was really interesting to me because that's also been the complaint of a lot of the internet's far right who have been demonetized on YouTube, which is basically when YouTube basically like doesn't go into business with a creator. They don't allow them to run ads next to their content. They're still allowed to post, but they can't run ads. And she was obsessed with this. It was all over her website, and I just found that compelling. And I'd been wanting to peg to write about the demonetization struggles for a while, and so it just seemed like a good moment to write about how strange this internet anger had become, and that here was in part a physical manifestation of it. I think this woman had a lot of other motivations, and obviously I don't, but that some of this anger we think of in online communities and think of as almost exclusively in online communities is not an exclusively online danger or risk or anger.
Yeah.
That it can become physical.
I also thought it was like sort of this bellwether, because as we start to talk more and more about content policing and policy changes, the audience is going to be impacted and the creators are going to be impacted, and that it can have such a direct, violent effect on a community so immediately. Especially all that we know about the Cambridge Analytica and that moment, that data, what happens to that data ends up having this physical outcome.
It's the real world.
It's the real world.
There's still, I find it crazy. People like, that Atlantic writer who got hired and then fired just now.
Yep.
Everyone's like, oh, well, it was just a tweet. The internet is the real world.
Yep.
Like, these companies are changing our real lives. Like, that it has taken so long for people to realize that is always funny to me.
Completely. I'd love to open it up to questions, because I imagine that you must have incredible questions for Nellie. So what are people interested in knowing? Any questions? I have more questions. I have a lot more questions, but I just wanted to see if there are any in the audience so far. Okay. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about you as a child.
Stop it. Get out of here.
I'm sorry. It's just that we're here. So, when America Online came out, it totally changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I was able to have all of these different relationships and connections. Was technology a part of your childhood growing up, and what was your relationship like to it?
Kind of, yeah. I remember we had a computer downstairs that my parents had no idea really like what its use case was, but then all my friends, we'd come over for sleepovers and we'd go immediately onto like AOL chat rooms, like the really inappropriate ones. And this was like a slumber party activity just to like chat with strangers and then scream and then turn it off.
Were you pretending to be someone else? Like, did you pretend you were older?
Oh yeah. We'd like, it was like a slumber. So no, my early interactions with computers were like that and like Napster. I don't know. What did anyone else do? What else was there to do? Like
private chats with older men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
is someone writing that book
like
yet?
Weird chat rooms and stealing content.
I was moving out of my house recently, and I found all the printouts that I had with these chats with older men.
Did you also do this? This was like the entire class.
Let's just poll the audience.
No, it's so weird. It's so weird.
Anyone? Did anyone?
We're off the record.
Are we the only people in the room that had
No,
chats?
everyone's just lying. They're nervous because it's weird. They know it's weird. I know it's weird. We all did it. Yeah. But no, I wasn't like a techie gadgety, although I love gadgets in general. I mean, who doesn't?
And so when you're starting to think about it from this anthropological experience, I'm wondering, like, who are the writers that you're reading that are inspiring you, and what are the fields of study where you're gleaning approaches to how to tackle this issue?
I mean, no one that weird. I think Didion wrote the best essays and stuff about California that anyone ever has. I think there are a lot of great reporters starting to do that about Silicon Valley now. I think Paul Lewis at The Guardian does stories that I'm jealous of once a week. The West Coast just doesn't get covered enough, though, in my opinion, and when it does, I don't think it's very good usually. So I think that it's been a bit of a desert. I mean, you guys probably feel it up here in Portland, like that there's not, it's not covered enough. Like, I feel like someone opens like a taqueria in Brooklyn and that gets a story in the Times, right? Like, in the whole West Coast is, to me, there needs to be a lot more reporters up here.
And you were saying when we were just talking, oh, is there a question? Oh, okay. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Nellie, I will agree that there's not enough good coverage of the West Coast. My partner is an avid reader of the New York Times, and she's always like, they always tell dumb stories about us. Like, how come there can't be a really good story about us? So please, report on us and give us a good story. But my question to you is, I'm a person who's really, I can't watch news anymore and I can't read news. I have a couple sources I look to, but can you give us any sort of guidance on what we should tune into, because there's just so much crap? And you seem like a real person, like really up there on stage, being real. So if you could give us the insight on how to like get our news and really help sort of the economy retrain how we get our news.
We're all sort of like in this together. It's a mess, but I think the mainstream stuff, like I think the last year has proven more than ever that the big newspapers are still so important. Like, I think the New York Times is pretty good. No, I mean, honestly, I think that the Times is great. I think the Post is amazing. In terms of video, I do think Vice News Tonight is doing great video. I think cable and watching all those faces in boxes yell at each other is like toxic for your brain, and like we should all just turn it off. I read Twitter obsessively, but I think that's probably not good for me. So I don't know what to take with that. Yeah. And I think, like, I don't know, I read Breitbart also every day, and I think it's really important to read stuff to understand how people are thinking. So I read news also as sort of like a way to get my mind around stuff I don't understand, if you can stomach it.
Yeah.
I may have a lead for you. I just got an update on my iPhone from Apple and downloaded it, and there's a 2-paragraph screed at the front assuring me of their concern about my privacy. So I feel so much better now.
Apple's really taking advantage of this news cycle. Please.
So I'm not that tall. I really admire the perspective on not taking a perspective, but how do you use that platform to encourage listening and reading in a particular direction that you want to shine a light on?
I don't want to encourage any direction. Like, I don't want to, I just want you to read it and see it exactly as I see it. Like, just see what it is, how they're talking, how they're moving, and if it's disturbing, then to be disturbed, I guess. But what I usually do, like in terms of how to do that, is I take notes while I'm watching something or while I'm in somewhere, and every sentence in my story is basically written while I'm there. Like, I write the whole story, and I kind of started that as a party reporter. You write the story in your notebook. You don't write the story when you get home. And you know the lead, and you know that everything is just there, and that helps me kind of like keep myself out of it. It's just only what I see. And obviously, like, our eyes are biased. What I see is biased. How I put it out is biased. Like you can't remove a human from something, but that helps a little bit. Like, it kind of keeps it dry. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your writing process and how you do the writing and storytelling? What's your office like?
I know, it's super weird.
Are you a
I
night
use
owl?
a treadmill desk.
Use a treadmill desk. What does that mean?
I love my treadmill desk.
Like you're running and typing?
I love my treadmill. No, I'm not running. I'm walking very slowly.
All right.
I'm walking incredibly slowly all day long.
And this is at home?
No, this is, well, it's both at home and at work.
You have 2 treadmill desks?
Okay, this video is never going online, to be clear. No one can know.
She has 2 treadmill
I have a treadmill. I love walking, and I find I have a lot of trouble riding and sitting still. I have a lot of trouble, like, sitting, like, I don't believe, everyone has this idea of riding is, like, you want to, like, go to a cabin and, like, be, like, in a quiet space. I want to be in, like, a loud space, and I want to be moving. And so...
And writing at the same time.
And writing. That's, like, the
Music?
ideal. Oh, yeah. But, yeah, so I just tread along. What do you want me to say? Yeah, I have my notebook. I take notes in my notebook. I'm a very firm believer. I can rant on that for like forever. And then I just go through and I write, and then I just start cutting things out. And I cut things out, and I cut things out, and I cut things out. And then when I have like 1,200 words, or like 1,800 words, then I file that. I don't think anything should be above 2,500 words. And any story I've done that's above that, be very wary.
Yeah. Yes, another question.
I was intrigued by your statement that you feel pressure to have a point of view. I've noticed that a lot of journalist friends feel like they are pressured to have more of a point of view these days. And it feels like even very smart, otherwise curious people are putting that pressure on journalists. Is that a phase that's going on right now as an anthropologist, if you will?
I don't know. I mean, this is the only era I've been a reporter in, so I don't know. But I think people, when times feel stressful, want guidance and want sort of answers. And like, I just, yeah, people want that. But I think, like, to me, like, newspapers and being a reporter in this sort of style is like, it's like a calling, right? It's like it's like joining the church of, and so I just really believe in the mission of that. Yeah.
I think we have one more.
I'm interested. Who do you follow on Twitter?
Oh, too many people, all terrible.
Top ones.
Who do I follow who I like? I really like, oh my God, do you know who I love? Is Nicole Cliff. Nicole Cliff is the best Twitter ever. I follow her, she's great. She does like stories and stuff in her Twitter feed. I've never met her, but I'm just like quietly obsessed from afar. And then Matt Pierce for West Coast News. Matt Pierce is the LA Times general assignment, sort of like roving national reporter. He does great West Coast news coverage. Mike Rosenberg is in Seattle, and he does amazing stories about Seattle and Portland and real estate. And like he tweets amazing tweets about the like shit show real estate situation, housing crisis, all that. Those are my recommendations.
Super. Well, I will ask you just the final question.
Oh, no.
2018, what should we all expect for the rest of the year, given what you're seeing on the ground?
I think that the Facebook reckoning will continue, and I think that I'm not sure how far it will go, but it could go much, much further. I think that the tech and addiction story is really interesting, and I'm going to like try to keep on that. I recently had a nerve damage in my right thumb, apparently, because I am on my iPhone too much.
Okay.
I'm really, really cool. And so I'm going to do a story about that. But like, I think that like addiction and like our like unhealthy relationship with these gadgets and like how they manipulate our brains is going to be a really interesting thing to unravel over the next like year. So yeah, Facebook, the addiction. I don't think crypto's done. I think crypto is unlike VR, which is like, I think a little bit of like a, crypto, like what's happening with blockchain technologies is really interesting and will be really important to watch and understand if anyone can. But yeah.
All right. And Portland. You're going to be writing stories about Portland.
And Portland.
You don't know it yet, but this whole room has a lot of stories to pitch you. So thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Nellie. Thank you.